Good evening. I'd like to call the business meeting of the Portland Board of Public Education to order. It is February 1st, 2022, and we're meeting in a blended format with some of us in person at Casco Bay High School and others joining via Zoom. We do not yet have a quorum, but Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll, and then we'll note as other board members join us.
Yes, Madam Chair. Ms. Bondo, Mr. Burke,
Here.
Ms. Russell Better,
Here.
Ms. Biliu, Mr. Youssef, here, Ms. Aswami,
Here.
Mr. McLaughlin, here, Mr. Alzamili, here, Ms. Santiago, Ms. Diu,
Here.
and Chair Figdor.
Here. So I want to note a couple of things. Ms. Santiago has a school conflict tonight and so won't be joining us. And Ms. Bondo is traveling and en route. So she will be in person at our next meeting, but won't join us tonight. And then Board Member Burke is joining us via Zoom because of an illness. And so he will join us for as much as he can tonight. And Board Member Burke, we thank you so much for being with us tonight for as long as you can. All right, with that, please join me and us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Portland Public Schools recognizes the original inhabitants of the land on which our city and schools stand, the Wolastoqiyik or Maliseet, Micmac, Penobscot, and Passamaquoddy tribes, known collectively as the Wabanaki Confederacy, or People of the Dawnland. We are honored to have Wabanaki children among our students today, and as a district, we are committed to making the past, present, and future of Wabanaki peoples visible in our schools and classrooms. So with that, we are going to move, as is customary, to public comment. So this is an opportunity for the public to comment on anything that we are not voting on tonight. And for members of the public who are joining us via Zoom, please indicate if you would like to speak to the board. Please indicate using the raise your hand feature in Zoom. When I call your name, which I'll call on your Zoom name, please state your name and where in the city you live. And then you'll have 3 minutes to address the board. So we will start with Drew Lessard. And Drew, you have 3 minutes to speak to the board.
Yes, good evening. Is my audio working? This is the first time I've raised my hand here.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity to just stand up and share some of my experience and my community's experience with the remote learning. I'm calling in from the LICEF district in North Deering. So I just wanted to share the parents, stakeholder group perspective on using this format for adverse weather and just the experience of what happened over the last couple of days. So I have actually, and before I kind of share some of that, I just wanted to note that I did correspond with Superintendent Bottano over the last 24 hours and really appreciate the, just the work that he's put in to communicate with parents during yesterday's remote learning day. So I've heard some of the perspective and the decision making that went into that, but I just wanted to share with the board just a moment what feels like a pretty frustrating tool to use with adverse weather. So my family is in a position where we are fortunate to sit in a home where we have room for the children. We do have 2 children, a kindergarten and a second grader. I have flexible management with my job. We have the things that we would need to be able to afford us somewhat easy logistics with trying to to deal with remote learning schedules. And what we found is, I've got 3 degrees, and it's really challenging for me to juggle 2 children at the same time with the number of meetings that we're dealing with the amount of work that's sent home, and it's just really challenging. I mean, I missed 2 of my child's meetings yesterday, and it's just frustrating. And so, I guess we are, as a parent group, finding it hard to understand, that how this is going to become a regular option, a regular tool. And I'm not saying that, I think I understand that it's not going to be the first line of defense, but it does feel like it asks a lot of the community. And I'm in a position where I'm pretty fortunate to be able to try and do that. So, I just imagine what some of the other members of our community are up against when, they might need to be physically present for a job, or just, don't have the means to make it easier at home. So I just want to stand up for the parents and say, hey, this doesn't work. It's really, really hard. We went through the last 18 months. We're hoping to come and leave that behind and kind of say, well, okay, so we have to go to school a couple more days in June. And I know that causes some other dominoes to fall, but hey, you know what? My kids couldn't even get outside till after 3 p.m. yesterday. And it was a beautiful sunny day, a snow day I would have loved when I was a kid. And so, I just want to speak up for our group, and I'll stop there.
Drew, thank you so much. I appreciate your coming tonight and sharing your own personal experience. Is there anyone else any other members of the public who would like to address the board? If so, please use the raise your hand feature in Zoom. Okay, I don't see any other public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. And we are going to move to the report of the chair. So just a heads up to everyone that we're going to move things around or I'm going to propose to move things around in the agenda a little bit to move up the votes that we have. And that will just better accommodate board members. Miss Biliu is going to join us soon. So I'm going to start on my report, which is fairly short tonight, and then we'll see where we are, and I will make a proposal in terms of how we take on the rest of the agenda. Okay. Well, first, Happy Lunar New Year. As folks probably know, this is the year of the tiger. And I noted today that the tiger is action-oriented, representing strength, bravery, and courage. So in my mind, the new year could symbolize resilience and strength. And I'm optimistic that it will if we together are action-oriented, brave, and courageous. I also wanted to note that today begins Black History Month, which I want to acknowledge and celebrate, but also recognize that every month should be Black History Month. American history is Black history, and our children, Black, white, and brown, all need to learn about Black history, and not just during one month of the year. Lastly, I wanted to circle back to the board and let you know that Board Member Burke and myself will represent the board in negotiations with the Portland Education Association, the Teachers Union. I look forward to negotiating a contract that works for our district and for our teachers, along with the rest of the team. And I want to thank Board Member Burke for making the time to engage in the process with us. And that is it for my report tonight. So now I'm going to return to the report of the students. Very excited to have a student report tonight. And tonight we're going to hear from Marwa Aslami of Casco Bay High School. So Mara, you have the floor.
Thank you. So tonight I would like to start with here at Casco Bay, we had just conducted our lottery for spots in next year's ninth grade. We had 139 students for 99 spots. All future freshmen were notified Friday of their spots in the lottery. Senior expedition season's on. We had the Changemakers Gala last week. Students presented everything from coral reefs to the Electoral College. They shared their passions and ideas for how to address need for climate change in the world. You can see some of their topics and expedition summary on the walls as you walk into the great space. 11th grade is working on public policy presentations around climate change issues. Those presentations will be taking place in Casco Bay. Friends and family are welcome to join in on February 15th and 16th. And the juniors are also preparing for a return for junior journey for citizen science service, as well as doing local services. 10th graders have started their new expedition called Beyond Borders, which focuses on migrant and immigration issues in various countries around the world. And we are currently in the middle of trying to figure out whether we should get a new mascot involving info from our current students and teachers, as well as alumni. Spirit Week coming the week of February 14th, and Winter Carnival on February 18th. And our mid-year parent conferences are this week, February 2nd and 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great job on that. And it's terrific to hear all that's going on at Casco Bay High School. And yes, thank you again. And now I'm going to turn to the report of the superintendent, which always is challenging to keep as interesting as hearing the student perspective and update.
Mhm.
So, Mr. Superintendent, with that
The only
introduction.
thing I can say is that it's always longer. So I think that those two things
I
may
think you're
not be
making my
unrelated.
point.
I think they may not be unrelated. So again, I would like to echo Chair Figdor's comments about Black History Month. I mentioned at our meeting, at our last meeting, that it was the day after Martin Luther King's birthday commemoration. And, I shared then some of the work that we're doing as a school district to make Black history something that is alive in our schools. So as we kick off this Black History Month, I just want to, echo the idea that this is, that Black history is something that we don't just learn during this month, but it's something that has to be embedded in our curriculum across the board, not just in the social studies area, but in other areas as well. So yesterday, as you heard, we had a remote day. We had intended to have the first 3 inclement weather days be traditional snow days. And after that, if we had sufficient warning, we were planning to have remote instructional days. For those who don't know that, remote days are considered student attendance days, and therefore we don't need to make them up at the end of the school year. Because of the advanced forecast for significant snowfall, I decided to advance a remote day on Monday. And, as I think you heard from Mr. Lassard, I've recognized for him and for others that remote instruction is not a replacement for in-person instruction. And I also understand that it's particularly difficult for students in the younger grades. We've dedicated time and resources to making it more viable, but still it's not the same as being in person in school. As a fairly large district, the experiences of students getting to school can be vastly different in different parts of the city. And, part of my job is to balance all of those experiences in my decision making. So what might be easy to access in one place may not be so in others. So preemptively making the remote day call enabled families time to plan rather than having to do this at the last minute. And I recognize that is also more helpful to some than it is to others. I want to be clear that this call was not made on behalf of the city. City crews were out in force and did a remarkable job cleaning streets and sidewalks all day Sunday and through Sunday night. We still, as a result of this, have a traditional snow day available for future inclement weather, and we are likely to need to use that as early as this week. We are planning a survey that will go out on Friday, along with our community newsletter on the remote experience. So we're hoping to get the perspectives from our staff and also from our families on their reflections and reactions to remote instruction as a measure for inclement weather. I can pause here if you want to do those quickly. We have recognitions next, so it's up to you. We can.
Let's go forward with the recognitions and then maybe pause after that.
Great. So at the last meeting, you'll remember we recognized Betsy Puth Jamesi as one of the 11 classified school employees across the state that were highlighted as RISE awardees for their exemplary efforts to further and advance the work of their school systems. In our excitement, we failed to notice that another of Portland Public Schools' amazing people was also on that list. And I don't know if Martha is here with us. I know that we exchanged emails and she was going to try to get away. She has a newborn and that can be complicated. So it looks like she was not able to get away. But Martha Thompson is an educational technician here at our Portland Arts and Technology High School, and she was on that list. Martha was nominated by Eva Rod, who's the PATH's Careers in Education instructor. And Martha has been an EdTech here at PATHS for the past 8 years, serving in both the Careers in Education program and currently in the Carpentry program. Her enthusiasm to learn new skills in order to better serve students shows her commitment and high level of professionalism and hard work. Those around her attest that she brings her job to a higher level and overachieves in everything that she does. According to Ms. Rod in her nomination, she said, Martha is flexible and understanding when asked to cover other programs, even if she's unfamiliar with the curriculum. As the Building Technology Coordinator, she has been instrumental in helping our staff to navigate the unsteady waters of remote learning, as well as other technological tools that we need in order to do our jobs well. So I just want to recognize Martha. I am incredibly sorry that we missed it in our excitement to have Betsy as one of those finalists. And Martha, you are tremendous, and we want to recognize you for your work and for your commitment to the Portland Public Schools. Next, I want to recognize someone who's a frequent participant in these meetings, our nurse coordinator, Tina Bailey. Tina was selected as a finalist for the Life Changer of the Year Award. Sponsored by the National Life Group Foundation, Life Changer of the Year recognizes and rewards the very best K-12 educators and school district employees across the United States who are making a difference in the lives of students by exemplifying excellence, positive influence, and leadership. Life Changer is a perfect description for Tina. All of our school nurses have played a pivotal and pressure-packed role throughout this pandemic to keep our students and staff safe. As school nurse coordinator, she has worked tirelessly to lead these efforts with supreme competence and grace. She has done that while holding a full-time position at one of our largest elementary schools at Reiki, and while also exerting leadership in a leadership role at the state level as well. Everyone that knows Tina knows that she does not seek the limelight. In fact, I had to resort to memes to get her to acknowledge that she was nominated and agree to have us mention it here today. Her colleagues know how special she is, whether taking care of a student in the nurse's office or making critical decisions throughout the pandemic. We are extremely proud of you, Tina, and deeply grateful for your dedication and service. Tina is now eligible to win one of several cash prizes to share with Reiki. So I'm calling on everyone in our community to help her win by adding comments of support to her nominee profile on lifechangeroftheyear.com. And again, Tina, you are amazing, and thank you for all that you do for us. I know that Nurse Becky was also, I don't know if she's here. Yes, Nurse Becky is here. Nurse Becky made the nomination. And Becky, do you want to share any words about Tina? I'm sure she loves to just hear us talk about her this way. So while we got her, let's use it.
Well, you know, what you said is true, and it sums it up nicely. And we love her, and she's been indispensable for us, as you know, for the past 2 years, and we're grateful because, like I said to some others, we're the envy of some other school districts that we have such a robust nursing staff, and thanks to all of you at the central office, as well as having to have a nurse coordinator for us. So thank you, Tina. We love you. Thanks for doing this.
Tina, would you like to say anything? I know.
Yes, just thank you. Thank you very much. It does. I'm very touched, and it is nice to be recognized. And it is wonderful to work in just a really great district with so many dedicated nurses, and to have the support that we have from administrators and from the school board and from central office and our own unofficial nurse with Assistant Superintendent Mr. Townsend, who's been with us. So just, yes, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Tina. And thank you, Nurse Becky. On Friday, the Construction Committee of the State Board of Education voted not to recommend our request to be rated for the Integrated Consolidated 9 through 16 program. While I'm disappointed in the decision, I was heartened by the positive response to the vision that we articulated. It's important to note that the committee's recommendation is preliminary. Oh, and we were going to stop and do the other stuff. Do you want to, I can come back to that and we can do those votes now so that,
Sure.
Yeah, I'm totally fine. Yeah.
Okay, so if it, thank you, Mr. Superintendent. And if the board is game, what I would propose now is that we pause the rest of the superintendent's update and we move to the report of the secretary so we can consider and vote on our minutes from our last meeting, and then that we go straight to personnel items. Those will be the votes that we have tonight, and then we will resume the meeting as stated in the agenda. So starting back with the remainder of the superintendent's report and then moving to our board focus. Does that, I'm just looking around the room, does that work for everyone? Okay, thank you so much for your flexibility. Okay, so we're now moving to the report of the secretary. And I'm not at that section yet, so bear with me for a moment. Consideration and action to approve the meeting minutes of January 18th, 2022. Is there a motion? Ms. Russell-Better, seconded by Mr. Youssef. Are there any board questions? I have just a quick correction to make, which is under number 7, the report of the secretary. Ms. Diu's name is misspelled.
Sorry about that. That seems to be a recurring theme, starting with your plaque. And so.
Not Miss Biliou,
No, her.
Miss Diu.
Oh, Miss Dio. Okay. Well, that's also a recurring theme because we also misspelled her name. So.
Okay, I don't see any board questions, so we'll move to public comment. Is there any public comment? So this is public comment on the meeting minutes, on our meeting minutes from our last meeting on January 18th. I don't see any hands up, so I'm going to close public comment, move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion on our meeting minutes? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the meeting minutes from our January 18th, 2022 meeting. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Ms. Russell-Better?
Yes.
Ms. Biliou?
Yes.
Mr. Youssef?
Yes.
Ms. Aswami?
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili?
Yes.
Ms. Diu?
Yes.
And Chair Figdor?
Yes. So the minutes are unanimously approved with the students voting with the majority. Now we're moving on to personnel items. Consideration and action to approve the appointment of teacher candidates 1 year only. Is there a motion? Mr. Youssef, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. Ms. Stoddard, would you like to speak to this motion?
I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any for the board.
Okay, thank you so much. Are there any questions on the motion? Seeing none, There is no public comment on personnel items, so we'll move to board discussion. Is there any board discussion? Seeing none, by roll call vote, please indicate whether you approve the appointment of teacher candidates 1 year only. Mr. Superintendent, will you please call the roll?
Yes, Madam Chair. Mr. Burke,
Yes.
Ms. Russell Better,
Yes.
Ms. Biliou,
Yes.
Mr. Youssef,
Yes.
Ms. Aswami,
Yes.
Mr. McLaughlin,
Yes.
Mr. Alzamili,
Yes.
Ms. Diu,
Yes.
and Chair Figdor.
Yes, so the appointments are unanimously approved with the students voting with the majority. Okay, thank you for that. So now we're going to move back to the superintendent's report. So Mr. Superintendent, please take it away, and thank you for your generosity with moving things around.
Not a problem at all. So I was talking about the construction committee of the state board, and I was saying that I was heartened by the positive response to the vision that we articulated, and that it's important to note that the committee's recommendation is preliminary, and we will still have a chance to present to the full State Board of Education on either February 9th or the 16th. I haven't checked today, but it was not listed yet. I am realistic that the recommendation of this committee carries a great deal of weight based on past practice. And I'm also encouraged by the recognition by committee members that it is problematic that no projects have been funded under this program, and that it may be time for a new application competition. Today, I want to provide an update on the Charter Commission's proceedings as they impact education governance in Portland. The board will recall that you provided recommendations to the Charter Commission back in December, and those recommendations dealt with multiple issues. Most salient was a recommendation to make the budget process more democratic by elevating the role of voters as ultimate decision makers. During our earlier appearance at the Charter Commission's Education Committee, our attorney, Aga Dixon from Drummond Woodsum, walked the committee through multiple options available under the law, including the possibility of the Board of Education serving as the legislative body for decision-making, subject to subsequent voter validation. The commission's attorney wrote an initial opinion to guide the commission that questioned the legality of this option. Our attorney, at our request, followed up recently with a response to that opinion. And that memorandum, so this subsequent response to Commission Attorney Katsafikas, is in your packet. And so are the original recommendations that the board made. The Education Committee of the Charter Commission is now meeting regularly. The committee is chaired by Marcus Houston, representing District 4, and includes at-large members Marfine Chan and Peter Eglinton. They're currently evaluating preliminary proposals being advanced by Commissioners Eglinton and Houston. Those preliminary thoughts are included in the board packet, also under this item. Last week, board chair presented public comment on those recommendations and followed that up in an email requesting that the board's formal recommendation, so your formal recommendation, be given a formal review by the committee. The Education Committee of the Charter Commission is scheduled to meet again tomorrow afternoon at 6 p.m. to continue its deliberations. And now I'd like to begin our regular update on how we're working to keep our schools open, safe, and healthy. I wonder, Assistant Superintendent Townsend, if you could run that PowerPoint. As we've been doing for the past year, we provide a comprehensive update on our school reopening plans at board meetings. And today's update is briefer. We're going to update you on case counts, including how we're tracking those cases to determine whether we remain safe to hold in-person school, and update you on school closures to date. If you recall, when we last met, our cases had increased significantly in the first 2 weeks of the school year. They topped off at over 500 cases at the end of the January 10th through 14th, the week of January 10th through the 14th. Since then, we've seen a marked decrease in the caseloads, with last week's count down to just over 150 cases. Note that this is substantially higher still than where we were and what we were seeing before the winter break and the advent of the Omicron variant. However, we are hopeful that we have turned the corner on this phase of the pandemic. Concurrently, our student attendance is rebounding. Our attendance last week was close to returning to what it had been prior to the break. Can you move? Yeah. So you can see that in those slides, which are included in the board packet, you can see that our student attendance last week was approaching where it had been prior to the break. Staff attendance has also rebounded, showing pretty much the same pattern. So this is what our absence rate looked like last week, and you can see that that's sharply down from where it was in the previous weeks. Today, we also wanted to show data on the incidence of cases across grades. So that's added to the other measures that we've been tracking, which is a comparison, which we also have in the presentation, a comparison of our cases against the what's reported more broadly in the community. So if you go to the next slide, this slide shows you grade by grade what the changes look like over the past 3 weeks. And you can see, a fairly sharp decrease pretty much consistently across the board. I think there's a couple things that I wanted to note. In the lowest grades, both pre-kindergarten, although they have small numbers, those numbers have not really dropped significantly from previous weeks. And kindergarten, where the numbers have dropped significantly but remain high. So I think that is one of the things that we're tracking is, what is happening at the lower grades. Does it have something to do with our mitigation measures? And we'll continue to watch that. It's also noteworthy that the 6th grade has continued to be the place with the highest incidence. And even though they've seen a dramatic decrease over time, they still were last week the place with the highest number of cases. So at the next slide, you'll see that our comparison to the county actually shows a difference between our data that wasn't there last time. But fortunately for us, it's in the right direction. You can see that the county seems to have flattened the curve. But, in our case, you can see that there was a sharp decrease from the previous weeks. So hopefully the county will follow with that sharp decrease in short order as well. Next, we just want to talk a little bit about our homework, our homeroom analysis. First, this is the total number of cases. So we show you here for the 4 weeks what the incidence of total student cases are as we move into the homeroom analysis. So you can see here that it's showing very much the same trend. We have fewer pools coming back with positives, fewer with multiple positives, and so on. In fact, only 3 classrooms last week were trending up. And so that means that they had cases for 2 consecutive weeks, and that there were at least 5 cases in total, and that the numbers had increased from 1 week to the next. So there were 2 and then 3 or something along those lines. So there were only 3 cases throughout the school system. And, if you contrast that with next slide, which was, the previous week you had 56, for example, in elementary school, and 11, classrooms that were trending that way. So that's, again, a sharp decrease from 1 week to the other. It brings us to our last slide, which is classroom closures for this week. And those are concentrated at Presumpscot School, where we have 2 classes this week that are remote. So we'll continue to look at our case counts, our staffing levels, and make decisions about continuity of instruction based on these data points. And almost 2 years into the pandemic, we continue to face twists and turns that result in significant challenges. And we've overcome these by working together, deferring to our medical experts, committing to keeping each other safe, by following the science, and by recognizing that our top priority is keeping our schools safe for in-person instruction wherever possible. And that concludes my report, which was not quite as short as Miss Aslami's, but, much shorter than my usual thing. So.
Good information in both cases. Thank you so much, Mr. Superintendent. Are there questions from the board about any aspect of the superintendent's report? Board Member Burke, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing the updated numbers, Superintendent. As one of the households that's been affected by COVID during these few weeks, and I believe it was a classroom transmission, I'm curious if you're also evaluating the CDC change of guidance, because that's the only thing that I've been able to evaluate is what's changed during my students in school experience and what has now resulted in a family of infections.
Say a little bit more. I mean, so the changes in the CDC guidance, the 5-day quarantine period as opposed to the 10-day quarantine period.
Yeah, and the guidance on when you can return in terms of what variables and present when you can quarantine or when you have to quarantine, depending on masking, vaccine status, all that sort of thing. It was rolled out with a lot of confusion, and I thought you did a nice job of, waiting till you could fully walk through the guidance with the nursing team. But, it's one of the things that I've hung my hat on that we've done an extremely good job in. With our Swiss cheese layers of mitigation that, those holes never all lined up before, by and large in the district, but between my own household and others that I'm hearing anecdotally, it seems like it's been a little bit more common for what families are tracing back to probably a classroom origin, not a community transmission. And that's the only thing that I know of that's changed. When I go pick up my kid, I saw the classroom windows open. I know that things are happening in the classroom. I guess there's a couple more indoor recesses, but just, you said you were going to evaluate if mitigation strategies weren't holding up as one of the reasons why we're still seeing numbers up. So I'm just wondering if we're going to look at the CDC recommendations and if they may bear impact on it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that we've tracked the same, the same data that we had prior to Omicron. Was that we had, very, very few cases of students who were quarantined that actually contracted COVID. That entire equation went out the window when, in the month of January with that huge spike. And so it's much more difficult for us to assess whether or not there was, there were instances in schools. That's why we started tracking homerooms and pools the way that we were, as a way of identifying those instances. And, in the cases where we have closed classrooms, those are cases where we've seen largely, there's a couple that were because of staffing issues, but largely they've been tied to, a significant number of cases in the classroom where we didn't have another explanation other than, perhaps there's something about the way that, that mitigation is happening here. And so but as those have been few and far between. I think we had, last week we had a couple, we have a couple this week. We had, 5 and, things along those lines during those more intensive, that more intensive period. So it's very difficult to say that, spread is or is not happening in our classrooms. With Omicron, obviously there has been so many more cases that it's, whether it's highly contagious, whether it's actually happening in the classroom or it's happening in the community or it's happening as kids walk together, after school to the bus and things along those lines. It's very challenging for us to be able to, but at this point we don't have a plan to revisit the 5-day quarantine. I think that we've, in general, we're seeing, you saw the trends across the board are all pointing in the, in the right direction. And, given the the shape that the pandemic has taken right now, we think that, trying to get kids back in school as soon as, the scientists are telling us that it's safe for them to come back. I think that that's something that we want to continue to do and, prioritize getting kids back into instruction as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you. And as we were celebrating Nurse Tina earlier, that continues for me. I think that you all have done a spectacular job. And as was said, we've been in envy of other districts for the resources that we've had to figure this out together. And I think that everybody is doing the right things based on the right reasons. And I trust your analysis will be a good one as you look to uncover other things that we might tighten up or do slightly differently. So thanks for answering that question.
Thank you, Board Member Burke, and we all wish you well, and you have a speedy recovery and your whole family as well. Are there other questions from the board? Ms. Diu?
I just had a question about the positive cases, whether they were asymptomatic or symptomatic, just because I had tested positive and was asymptomatic. And is anybody continuing to test positive after they've? I had been sick personally in the beginning of January, and the doctor's office said that you can test positive for 3 months.
Yeah. So part of our process is after somebody tests positive, if they are participating in the district testing and the pool testing, as long as we know that they are, that they've already had COVID, they're excluded from the testing for 90 days from that point forward, so that they won't, come back positive and then, have us test everybody in that pool only to find out that it's the person who had previously had COVID. But, obviously we don't know everybody that is, there are people that are asymptomatic that don't test or test and don't tell us, and all of those other, variables are at play. And, and it does happen often. I don't want to say often, but it does happen that we have pools that come back positive, and then we do Binax testing for everybody in that pool, and there are no positives. So in those cases, it's either that somebody, had COVID and still has the antibody and it's showing up in the PCR test, or that somebody is just like beginning to have COVID and they're not, they don't have a high enough level of COVID to show up positive on the Binax, on the antigen tests.
Thank you.
Did I get that sort of right?
Yes.
Assistant Nurse Coordinator Townsend?
Lots of things today.
Yes.
I would wear that as a badge of honor, Assistant Superintendent Townsend. Okay, thank you for that. I don't see any other questions from the board, so we're going to move on. And next is consent items. Mr. Superintendent, will you please speak to this item?
Yes, give me 1 second. Under Board Policy KCD, the school board accepts by unanimous consent contributions made to the school district. As required by that policy, all of the donations are listed in the board agenda under this item. Our practice is for each donor to receive a written contribution acknowledgement expressing our heartfelt gratitude as well as for their tax purposes. I would like to thank the many generous contributors to the Portland Public Schools who have made donations of durable goods, goods of substantial value and historical or commemorative significance, including for Ocean Avenue, where they received donations, they received the following donations: 10 pairs of matching hats and mittens for students from Kathy Stevens of Saco, a monetary donation to support students and staff from Gail Cressy of Buxton, multiple jackets, snow pants, and boots for students from Jody Halliday and Bill Kowalczyk of Peaks Island, 22 pairs of snow boots for students from Adam Siegel of the Jewish Community Alliance of Southern Maine out of Portland, and a monetary donation to use towards purchasing clothing, shoes, boots, jackets, and mittens for students from Berlin City of South Portland. Casco Bay High School received a monetary donation for the ski club from Jessica Teasdale of Hauser Packaging of Portland. Casco Bay also received a monetary donation for school use from Liz and Pierre Meal of Portland, and Portland High School received Hannaford gift cards to purchase food for students from April and Dennis Noonan of Portland. We thank all of these generous contributors for their generosity and for their support of the Portland Public Schools.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Now we're moving to our board focus on educational issues for the evening. And tonight we are talking about pre-K. So, Mr. Superintendent, am I handing it to you or to Assistant Superintendent?
Just very briefly, just to tee it up for Assistant Superintendent Nally. As you mentioned, we have a board focus with an update on pre-kindergarten program and planning for next year. This is part of our ongoing series of updates leading up to our budget presentation. As you know, we're entering, or as many of you know, we are entering the 4th year of our 5-year pre-K scale up. When completed, we will have added 11 classrooms across the school system, allowing us to provide nearly full access to public pre-K for 4-year-old students across the city. We've added limited transportation this year and continue to look at increasing access to that, as well as addressing before and after care for families needing that service. Here to give us an update on the work to date and plans for next year is Assistant Superintendent Malia Nally.
Great, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So let me get this set up. Great. So as the superintendent just said, our goals this evening are to provide you all with an update on our progress toward the 5-year goals outlined in the resolution, and then to just briefly highlight some of the resource investments we'll be needing in the upcoming budget. Before I jump in to the presentation, I did want to just acknowledge several people whose work I'm representing this evening. First, past director Sue Chevalier, just a shout out to her for her work that led to much of the progress we've made and who pulled together much of the content in tonight's presentation for our past curriculum committee meeting in November. I also wanted to acknowledge Dina Louie. She's the pre-K administrative assistant who also pulled together much of this data and information and who's been helping us grow and improve our pre-K program. In addition, starting strong, here with me this evening are Matt Dubell, who's the executive director of Connect Ed, and Katie Camplin, the director of Starting Strong. You'll be hearing from them about some of the ways they've been partnering with us to achieve our shared goals. And then the Data Innovation Project, a special shout out to Emily Swenson and Alora Way, who've been pulling together our data, some of which we'll share this evening so that we're able to make data-informed decisions about our next steps in the pre-K expansion process. And then finally, I wanted to acknowledge that our new pre-K director, Alyssa Bork, who you were introduced to last month, starts tomorrow. So this is my last act in my side gig as the interim pre-K director. All right. So for many of you, this is recall, but I recognize that for some of you, this is newer information. And so I just wanted to reground us in the resolution that we adopted in 2019. The goal we landed on at the time of the resolution was framed as universal access to quality pre-K, and that's as opposed to universal pre-K. This distinction was debated at the time, and the board landed on these 5-year goals with an intent to revisit the goal of universal access once we reach these goals, which we are on track to do by next year. By universal access, we mean that every family who wants to send their child to a high-quality pre-K can do so, whether it's in a public pre-K classroom or Head Start or Child Care Center or family-based childcare. This accounts for the fact that not every family wants to send their child to pre-K, and national data indicates that 83 to 87% of families choose to participate in pre-K when it's universally available. And that some families can access the community programs in our area and have the financial means to do so. And so we wanted to honor the fact that many families prefer community partner programs, and we wanted to be mindful of ensuring that our public pre-K program doesn't inadvertently undermine the broader child care system in our city. So we sought to expand public pre-K classrooms to address the gap in access. The target we set considered the number of low-income families who are not accessing high-quality pre-K to determine how many more seats we'd need to make it accessible to all. In addition to committing to expansion goals, the resolution also committed us to addressing the barriers that were surfaced in the study we did in collaboration with Starting Strong and DIP as well. Namely, we learned that some families were not accessing the seats because of a lack of transportation and wraparound care. We set out to add in these options for families within the 5-year timeline set forth in the resolution. Finally, the resolution called for an assurance of high-quality programming in terms of support and evaluation. So I'm going to step you through where we're at in terms of expansion, the seats available, enrollment, and what we're learning from our declines and wait list. So first, we have 220 seats available this year. And since the adoption of the resolution, as the superintendent mentioned, we've added 96 new seats. And you can see that summarized here. Our classrooms have increased from 9 to 15, and enrollment in our public pre-K has nearly doubled. The pre-K serves more Black or African-American students proportionally than the district overall, and slightly fewer white and Hispanic students than the district overall. And more than 1/3 of Portland pre-K students enter pre-K as English language learners, which is a slightly higher percent than our overall ELL population in the district, though fairly proportional. The majority of our English language learning students are identified as needing intensive English language support when they enter public pre-K, and you can see that that data has really changed in the last recent years. And I did want to include this because I think it's important for perspective, especially when we get to talking about the DLL supports that are needed for our pre-K classrooms. And then I wanted to share a little bit more context in terms of how the lottery process is going and what we're learning from this past year. So here you can see on the slide, we had during last year's lottery window, 241 families apply during the actual lottery window, and just about half identified as low income and half did not. 70% of the people who applied within the window were English speaking only, and 30% were multilingual. And then of those families who applied within the window, 227 initial offers were made. And of the offers that went out, 92% of the applicants were offered a placement in the pre-K. So from that first window. In terms of the wait list, just under 100 families applied for a seat after the lottery closed. A higher proportion of those families identify as being low income in terms of their economic background and as multilingual. At this point, we're down to 20 families remaining on the wait list, which, just to be clear, gets added to ongoing throughout the year into this academic year as well. And it's now closed, and we close it at the launch of the new lottery process. We do currently have 2 remaining seats available at Presumpscot, which we're actively working to fill with the families that are on the wait list. And just to be clear, those haven't been opened all along. It's due to changes that have occurred mid-year. For the first time this year, we tracked reasons why families declined a seat when they were offered a seat in the public pre-K program. And these are the major reasons cited for not taking a seat. The biggest, although these are all approximately close to each other, did so because they needed to be guaranteed before and after care. Some families said in the end they preferred a different location, so they might have gotten a seat at a particular site but didn't want to be at that site. Some people were moving in and out of Portland. Some families brought up COVID concerns when it came down to it. And then about 30% said they preferred a different program. And I looked into that a little bit more with Dina, and some of the kind of sub reasons under that had to do with the hours of the program, the before and after care availability. And the other kind of key issue there were that people were offered placements in the late spring and summer, and they'd already paid down payments at daycare. So the timeline issue is complicated. And so that was a practical challenge for some families. So that brings us to looking ahead to adding more seats for the coming school year. And I'm very proud to say that we are on track to meeting our expansion goals and target timeline, despite the past couple of years during which so much time, attention, and energy was really consumed by responding to the pandemic. So according to our plan, we should be adding 2 more classes for next school year, and then 1 more class the following school year. We currently have no available space in our schools, and so we're going to need to expand with community partners in order to add the 2 expansion classrooms this year. And in order to determine where there is need and who might be ready and willing partner, we're working with Starting Strong and the Data Innovation Project. The Starting Strong team is getting more clear about where there is still a need and not yet what we're calling universal access to high quality pre-K. And then once they have that information clear, they're helping to identify potential partners in those neighborhoods. I am pleased to share that we're in active conversations with one of our existing partners who's interested in and likely able to expand, which is St. E's or St. Elizabeth's, which is great news because our data does right now suggest a need in the Rikey neighborhood. So Matt Dubell is here with me this evening, like I had mentioned, from ConnectEd. And so I'm going to pass it off to him to share a little bit more about what he and Katie are doing to help out on this front. So Matt, are you here?
Yes, thank you, Malia. Good evening, everyone. So as Malia mentioned, we have been working with Data Innovation Project to understand the potential need across neighborhoods in the city. Obviously, as we expand program sites, we want to aim to expand opportunity in the neighborhoods that have had less access. And so the best source of information on that right now is actually from kindergarten registration forms. So parents are asked on the kindergarten registration form, has your kindergartner attended any school or program prior to kindergarten? It's parent self-reporting, but it gives us information across all of the elementary schools. And so it gives us at least a snapshot of that opportunity for some sort of preschool experience. And just to note, this could be anything. This could include 4-year-olds who went to a public pre-K, who went to Head Start, who were in a family childcare, a childcare center. So it really is the broadest definition of attending something prior to kindergarten. And so we averaged, we looked at the past 4 years and averaged those, and you're looking at that here. So there's plenty more to dig into, but this does give you a snapshot, obviously, that there's a range of access, ranging from a high of 85% of all 5-year-olds having had something, down to a low of 61% of the kindergartners having had something. So obviously, as we think about expansion, we want to think about potential partners in those neighborhoods where there is less access so that we can really target expanded opportunity to those places. Now, of course, the location is not the only factor. Obviously, there are barriers that Malia is going to talk about that we need to also think about to help families access existing pre-K slots. But it does give us an opportunity as we think about expanding to try to place those expansion sites wherever possible in the places where they're most needed. I do want to mention just as we think about potential partners to work with, as Malia mentioned, obviously the current partners are the starting point. We do have some promise there for some potential expansion. But the other good news is that we have, I think, a more clear sense from actually Maine DOE about potential partners. And some of you will remember when we entered into this 3 years ago, we were assuming that any potential partner would need to be an accredited child care program. So that means they are at the highest level of quality on the state rating system. And that's been clarified. So we now understand that there are providers that are at what's considered a step 3 level. Step 4 is the accredited level. Step 3 is the level just below that on the quality scale. That those providers could potentially be eligible to partner. And in fact, that some of the other providers we hadn't really been engaged with before, the family child cares and the lower step rated centers, could also be eligible to be public pre-K partners if they can meet the state's requirements, which are spelled out in Chapter 124 regulations. So there's sort of an expanded pool that we're looking at now, and we'll be working with the district to look into potential partnerships from that bigger pool than we were initially thinking about 3 years ago. So I'll pause there, Malia.
Okay, thank you, Matt. And just again, a huge appreciation for starting strong, Matt and Katie, for the collaboration around this, as well as helping create the connection to the Data Innovation Project. So next, I want to share a few updates on where we're at with addressing the key barriers that we're seeking to remove in order for all families to be able to access our public pre-K seats. And starting with transportation. So first, we're pleased to share that we are now offering transportation to pre-K students. So that's a huge win. In order to do this, we have hired 2 additional drivers, 2 bus aides who assist with the young students, and we've added seat harnesses to several buses. So in terms of what that's enabled us to offer, you can see the data here on the slide. 61 of the applicants from within the lottery window said that they did want transportation. And once placements were offered and accepted, we then figured out transportation availability. And ultimately, we're able to offer 53 students rides within August. In the summer, late July, transportation did close their routes to new rider requests until they could reassess space and logistics. And so at that point, we were not adding more pre-K students, and we were letting them know there was a wait list and they could potentially be pulled off it, as you can see here, mid-September. And so as of February, we've offered transport to 19 of the 27 students, who are on that wait list. And so total, we have 57 pre-K students in PPS buses at this point. So just about a quarter of the students. Oh, and I wanted to actually say a couple more things. So in terms of why we're not yet able to guarantee transportation for all pre-K students, I guess first I wanted to say we've made great progress, and I did want to shout out Robin Wells and Joel Thoitz for their creative and tireless work to make and remake routes in order to give us many pre-K students who need transportation rides as possible. It's a huge, complicated puzzle that I have barely had a peek into and gotten overwhelmed and a headache every time. It's very complex. So the reasons why we're not yet able to guarantee transportation for any pre-K student who needs it is related to the fact that first, the routes aren't lined up with the neighborhood schools precisely. So we've got paths, we've got the community partners. So that adds a whole other kind of layer of complexity with figuring out how you route those students. And then because we don't yet have all of our students placed in their neighborhood schools, some students who have a neighborhood school that doesn't have many seats end up taking a seat, if they win the lottery, if you will, in another school. So that adds other complexity to what we could offer. It does have the implication that some families are able to say, I'm okay not having transportation, and so consider me for any seat that's available, which means they might get pulled, whereas another family might end up still sitting on the wait list because of that transportation. I also think that it's worth noting that we aren't able in our lottery, and this is the case this year as well, in our communications to fully guarantee transportation. So our language talks about offering limited access to transportation. And so I think that's a factor, and you saw that in the data I shared previously about the reasons families declined. For families that need that absolute guarantee, we haven't been able to absolutely commit to that as well. So huge progress, tons of work, and great investments that have enabled us to get this far, but still not yet at that universal transportation access for pre-K students. And then in terms of before and after care, we've made some initial steps in terms of providing families more support. So the first is that we extended the pre-K day to line up with the elementary school. So it's a longer pre-K day. I did want to call out this note that it had the unintended consequence of creating a time gap for start times. So some families have a pre-K start time on the early start, and a child in, let's say, third grade on the late start at a different site. And then on the flip side, there are other families that have students with kids in different places with the same starts, which has its other kind of trick to that. So that is a logistical complication that's at play that I just wanted to acknowledge. Beyond extending the length of the school day to mirror the school schedule, we've also continued to expand with community partners, which is a part of the before and after care strategy because they are able to offer the wraparound care, which is already baked into their programs. And then we're looking into how we can offer before and after care for pre-K students in the Portland schools. And so Sue launched the planning work during the pandemic around this. And at that time, when we started, we were investigating 3 different pathways. So the first is partnering with REC to just expand their offering to 4-year-olds. The second pathway we started to look into is finding a new partner to run before and after care for 4-year-olds. And then thirdly, we looked into what it would take to build a childcare offering ourselves and run it internally. So our first pass at looking into this led us towards pursuing the new partner strategy. And we built out a pilot model with LearningWorks at one of our school sites. We ended up pausing that work, just given the challenges with lifting it and the high cost to run it for a very small number of students. And it was happening in the middle of the pandemic. So that got kind of paused for the short term. We have since reignited conversations with Parks and Rec about what it would take to be able to extend their offering to 4-year-olds as well. And we haven't finalized this as a full go, but we've had some really positive and productive conversations with Ethan and Marie from the city. And the main challenges that we've identified on our end and in collaboration with them are first resources. So we know this, but it's going to cost more for them to run it because of the lower ratios and because of the additional administrator that they need to oversee what would be a distinct program. Second biggie is licensing. I think we've mentioned this to at least those of you who've been around for a while. Childcare falls under DHHS and we're under the DOE, and there are different requirements. And so the DHHS would require us to get a childcare license for each of our buildings. We have been in active conversations with the state about this, and they understand the challenge, and they weren't able to help us understand other districts that have, gotten around that yet. So we're kind of in conversations with them. We also hadn't been clear yet as to which of these pathways we were going to absolutely commit to. But that's kind of a conversation underway. But if in the end we do have to license every building, which seems to be what we'd have to do right now, it would be a substantial body of work. Third kind of key challenge is space. So for REC or any other partner or ourselves, we'd need to find space for this. And we're aware that space sharing is already a challenge for REC in our schools, and the 4-year-olds would need additional age-appropriate spaces. So while we've considered using pre-K rooms, there are lots of challenges to doing that right before and after school, where the teacher's prepping, they're planning, and then they also have all their spaces. You can imagine as a teacher, I used to have my room set up, papers on the desks the night I left. And so if you have a whole REC coming into your classroom using your materials, whatnot, it's very tricky and not at all ideal for teachers. And then the final one that we talked about is hiring. They have had a lot of struggles with staffing. And I think folks are aware of that, just like us. And then early childhood folks are even more specialized and hard to find. And so together we anticipate some potentially significant hiring challenges. So I am eagerly awaiting Alyssa's start date. Now it's hours away. So we have somebody in seat to pick the conversations up with REC. She did join the last conversation that I had with them. But they have been clear that if we are to pursue expansion to 4-year-olds with them, the earliest launch they would be able to do would be the fall of 2023. So that's kind of where we're at right there. Finally, I wanted to share a few other updates on how things are progressing in relation to the other priorities we set. So first, in terms of lottery, we are feeling good about some refinements we've made to our lottery process, some of which are increasing outreach to all families, so more recruitment ahead of the lottery window, more language access kinds of opportunities, expanded recruitment, interpreted calls, more social media. Also, we have, since we started looking at this, expanded the lottery window and then had a clear time limit for accepting slots to be able to manage this more efficiently and effectively. As I mentioned earlier, we've started tracking reasons for declines, and then we're working with DIP on data tracking process improvements. We've had a close partnership with CDS on students with identified needs and with language partners to support new pre-K DLL students. And we've added information to our website describing our lottery process for greater transparency into how we facilitate it. At the same time, we are aware that there are several ongoing challenges in our lottery process. So first, the timeline does seem to be a challenge still for many families. You saw earlier that we continue to notice that families who qualify for free and reduced lunch and multilingual families are overrepresented on the wait list later on in terms of applying outside of the window. In addition, our student cap and cap on classrooms makes it hard to ensure availability for students who qualify for Mckinney-Vento and who are joining our district ongoing. So we're actively working with Priscilla Bittencourt, our Mckinney-Vento Coordinator, on ideas for making sure we have some spots available for students experiencing homelessness and for whom pre-K is an especially high leverage strategy. And then we're also aware that since our expansion and barrier removal work are happening concurrent with the lottery, like I mentioned before, we can't always make firm commitments, and that creates some challenge for families in this process. So we continue to refine the process while working to center the experience of families who are currently or have experienced marginalization. I also wanted to give a little update on the mixed delivery model. In terms of a mixed delivery model, we're offering a blend of school-based and community partner-based seats. And I think it's important and helpful to highlight some of the very crucial opportunities this presents for our community, and then some of the practical challenges that come with manage a citywide program in this structure. So highlighted here on the slide, I think, the opportunity, it promotes the citywide model that supports providers and the community at large. And that's not insignificant. This is something I've learned a lot about in terms of the whole infrastructure of childcare in our city. It does offer this opportunity to expand when we don't have space in schools, which has been the case for the past couple of years. Like I mentioned, they have the wraparound services baked in, and it enables families who have their children in some programs to have that infancy through pre-K experience. And then on the challenge side, I think one, and this is the biggest, and this will come up when I talk a little bit about resources, but they lack the baked-in supports that we have in schools. And so they don't have a social worker on site. They don't have aides to help cover lunch and duty. They don't have the nurse like we have. So those things have really come up a lot more in terms of how do we piece together those supports when they're needed. And I would say, obviously, the nursing piece is not insignificant. We're not doing the pooled testing at the sites and things like that because they don't have the nursing capacity. But in particular, this year's social work has been a huge challenge. The transportation complexity I mentioned, so that's just another big task on our team. So this is that hidden work that people don't see. The amount of additional work on our transportation team is, we didn't add capacity to the planning. We added bus drivers, but now it's a bigger body of work to try to figure that out. There's some inconsistency in the program offerings in terms of specials. Lots of just the protocols and schedules and things like that, just managing that creates a big body of work, which leads to this last point, which is it's a heavy lift on the director to support the daily issues. So this is partly the community partner sites and partly the impact of the contract, but having the partner site teachers on our contract just means that what we've started to observe is our director spending a lot of time hiring, supervising, evaluation, lots of sort of troubleshooting around lunch, planning time, substitutes. And it's been good for me to be in this interim role as my side gig because, I'm getting the calls about we don't have a sub and how to, and it's where the system is tricky. So I just think that as we continue to expand, I'm very aware that we need to be looking carefully at the capacity needed to manage this kind of a blended model citywide in order to do that and still keep our focus on quality. Which brings me to the last update, which is around program quality. In terms of where we are right now, we have common curriculum and assessment tools and practices across all of our sites, and all of which is kind of aligned up through our K-5 expectations. So we use the Pre-K for Me curriculum, which is a curriculum put out by the state that's high quality and approved through Chapter 124. We've been working with Tracy Zager, who coaches our elementary math coaches. She's worked with some teachers on the Pre-K team to help them bring learning to their colleagues around the kind of foundations of a problem-based math curriculum, which you might imagine work beautifully in Pre-K. We have the SEL second step curriculum at the Pre-K level. And then all of our teacher leaders, Brooke, Fiona, Katie West, and Outdoor Learning, they're all working with the pre-K continuum in mind. So there's a lot of intentionality around how do we make that progression meaningful in terms of what students are exposed to in pre-K. We're using a consistent screener, the Dial 4. This is new. There was a period of time when we were using different screeners in different schools. The Teaching Strategies Gold is a really awesome, robust formative assessment tool that we use consistently. And then our goal is to use CLASS, which is like a way to evaluate how the program is going. So Sue is hopeful in wanting to do that. And I know Alyssa is familiar with that. So that's something that we plan to implement. And then we have onboarding. We do have pre-K that's specific, or PD, excuse me, that's specific for pre-K teachers, and then efforts to integrate them intentionally into the school-based K through 5 professional development, including the teachers at the partner site. So we have them paired up with a homeschool. So in terms of budget priorities, some of the anticipated resource investments we're looking at are delineated here. So first would just be the basic expansion. So if we're able to find 2 viable partners in the part of our community where we have the need, then we would need to hire 2 new teachers, 2 new ed techs, and we're looking at the DLL ratios like I'd mentioned earlier. There would be a cost for the 2 new contracts and the classroom setup. So that's kind of the big cost around expansion. Then there's this issue of community partner site supports. The dedicated subs is something that has been ESSER funded. I don't know what would have happened without those people. I feel like that's part of how I spend my time, is emailing and calling people where they are and how do we swing them around. They've actually ended up, well, anyway, they're very heavily used. And then the social work. So we added this year a stipend for one of our social workers. So she's been awesome at doing some additional time to consult with the sites. But again, it has been pretty substantial, the need. And so we're feeling like we need something, just more fully baked and not just one social worker's extra time after work. And then there's this issue of break coverage. So they don't have the kinds of building aids and things like that. So there are challenges with teachers actually getting their contractual planning and lunchtime. And then finally, I don't anticipate having anything concrete in this budget per se around the before and after care, like I was signaling. I think we imagine this being a planning year, but just wanting to highlight that there's the potential to need some capacity building resources or planning resources, if you will, especially like I mentioned, the licensing thing. That's a big body of work that would have to be happening in the next academic year. So just wanting to highlight that piece as well. And that's all I have for this evening. So open for questions.
Thank you so much for all of the content and analysis in that presentation. Turning to the board, what questions do you have? I see a hand up, so I'm going to start with Board Member Burke.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Assistant Superintendent. That was incredibly thorough. It seems that we're running a district within a district when we walk through what's happening in pre-K. I think I have 2 questions. First, with what was brought forth by Mr. DeBell with the possibility to include Tier 3 providers, does that bring forward any issues when it comes to pay equity? And as you were touching upon with them being on the contract?
I'll start, but Bat, please chime in. I mean, our current agreement is that they would have to be on our contract and they are on our local budget. So I'm sure that will be, and Matt, you can speak to this, a potential challenge with partners. Sue had certainly expressed that as she explored partners in the past, but in terms of the pay equity, no, we would be paying them at our salary. But Matt, maybe you can speak to the extent to which that will be a challenge for potential partners within their internal teams.
I don't think the challenge is any different. I think you're exactly right. They'd be on contract. So it's the same challenges in a partner navigating having staff that are on the PPS contract. But it wouldn't be an issue because their own pay rate would not be the rate.
Can I just and this may be more helpful, I think Mr. Berg understands this fully. I don't know that everybody does, that, the pay equity issue then becomes one within the existing staff at the partner site where, the person that is on our, on our payroll, on our contract is paid at a rate that is sometimes significantly higher than what the normal pay is in that organization. So I think that's where, it would certainly, to Mr. Burke's question, continue to be the challenge that is in these organizations.
Yeah. And I think and we had a lot of discussion about this as a board when that decision was made, but I think I would say that the directors want folks to be paid that much. They can't do that financially for their whole staff. And so it is very difficult and, was a primary reason why we weren't able to stay in the same type of partnership with Head Start, though I think I would consider them still a partner in other ways.
Yeah, thanks for addressing that. And, I hope, just as you said, directors would want to be able to pay staff more, and hopefully we can be part of a growth edge. And I think the state needs to step up, as they're looking to do in some areas of how they're building out the child care infrastructure in the state, as it's a consistent problem, and the pay being one of them.
Yeah.
My second question, I'm going to say this with a big smile, but I mean it with all seriousness too. I hear some of the constraints related to before and after care, and one of them being space. And I'll just say that we have a big opportunity, which would be to look at forest programming for our before and after care. And if that's something that we did with rec, I'd be all for that. But there's no reason why we couldn't expand upon what we started with our outside learning and start there rather than trying to transition people from inside out. We could be getting our culture from the outside in. And so I would strongly support staff investigation of forest programming for before and after care. And so that's more a statement. My question would be, have you thought about that? Have you looked at that yet?
Not deeply, only because we were pausing and didn't have a director and waiting to pick this up. But I think very initially, Katie would be in love with that concept. And so I think it's a great thing to name that we bring her. And for those of you who don't know, Katie West is our outdoor learning coordinator, into some of those conversations with Alyssa and with the rec team, if that's in fact the direction that we go. So I think it's a great thing to call out and to suggest.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks again for the presentation and for all the progress you've made throughout this entirely challenging pandemic times. It's kind of remarkable and unbelievable to hear that we're still on track to meet targets. So thank you all.
Thank you to your son for his background dance appreciation as well.
There you go. There's a little extra.
Thank you, Board Member Burke. Are there other board members that have questions?
Do you have a question? Oh, okay.
Miss Billy, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Malia. I really appreciated that presentation. I just have two questions that are pretty brief, but I'm wondering what does the application process look like?
Yeah, so it's an online application, and there's translation. And then what we say in there is, if you don't have the means to complete the application online, you can call Dina, who's the administrative assistant, and she'll step you through that and help you, or the multilingual team who does it with families. So basically, it's an online application, but we have supports for people who aren't able to complete it, either because of technology or just because they don't know how to, maneuver through the application to do it with them.
Okay. So what if folks literally don't understand the internet or don't have any capacity to go online and then self-assess that they can't do the whole application? Is there any assistance for that?
Yeah, so there's information in all of our flyers and in our, in what we put out in terms of like, what's it called? The voice thing that when we do
Robocalls?
Thank you. The robocalls about how to access support. And again, there's phone numbers. So you can call Dina directly and she'll help you. Or you if it's language, you can call Multilingual and they'll step families through it. So, and that happens pretty frequently.
And a big source of registration is in our intake process. So as families register, and I think that, some of what you saw there in terms of the numbers with the large number of students who are free and reduced lunch and second language learners, that is the result of the rolling enrollment that happens.
Oh, because of the intakes?
Yeah, because of the intakes. And so I think, we pick up if somebody's coming to intake and, they have a pre-K kid, that registration process happens right there.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then I just had one other question about data collecting. I think the director, he had stated that a lot of the data collecting on just any activity that students were doing was based on parents kind of assessing their situation. I guess this the same question with that as well. How are you learning from folks that might not be able to do that?
Yeah, so I think like the superintendent mentioned, so that happens in the enrollment process. So if families are needing support, they have support who's stepping them through that part of the process. And that's where there's a question about, has your child had any, and that's really at the kindergarten stage where we ask that question in kindergarten enrollment. If your child has had a pre-K experience, and then there'd be a follow-up question from there. So for people who need help understanding the question and filling that out, it's the same kind of process and the same people who would help them. Okay. Is that?
Yeah, I'm just wondering because one of my aunts, she has 2 kids that are under 3, and she's never had any opportunity to put them through pre-K, and she doesn't know any capacity to call somebody or even figure out where to go, how to get access to that. So I'm just wondering what is the assistance for if you don't speak English, even if there is capacity for you to read within your language, you might not be able to read. If just some of those very deep intersectional barriers. And I'm wondering because obviously she could really use a program like this, or somebody like her could. So I'm just wondering how are we maybe even working with DHS to see what are some of the folks that do have kids under this age limit that we're not seeing or that aren't showing up in the spaces.
I wonder if Matt, you could talk a little bit about the work that's happening outside of, because the children that you described, the 2 and 3 year olds would not be Portland Public Schools students, because our programs start at age 4. But what are some of the things that are happening through Starting Strong, particularly in the last couple of years, to try to do a better job of reaching out and making those community-based opportunities visible to different communities? I don't know if Matt is still with us. He may not be.
I'd also welcome if my colleague Katie wants to jump in on that. That is a big need. And one of the things we've been working with partners on is trying to simplify that process for people to access that information. And one of the things that links back to the data collection is in our work with Data Innovation Project, part of the next phase of analysis that we haven't gotten to yet is actually doing focus groups with families to better understand, what's working, what's not working, and how to help people become aware of the process, engage in the process, and be able to connect with the opportunity. But I think what you're mentioning is important.
And then Grace, I think. Oh, sorry.
I saw that Dr. Valenzuela was also there, and I wonder, in response to this question, and I don't know this, so it's news for me as well. As we do intake registration, we obviously know, families that have 2 and 3 year olds. Do we have a clear pathway to make them understand what are some of the other options that are available for early childhood, outside of our pre-kindergarten program for 4-year-olds?
Yes, that is a very good question, Superintendent. As part of the intake process, we take in information in the what we call education and family history form. And so in this form, these are some of the questions that we ask in details to families. And so then we get alerted if there are students who are going to be eligible for pre-K and K when they're actually just registering as an older student. So that's one. The other thing that we do at Multilingual is that, and this is to answer Nyla's, Ms. Bellew's question about, we are using non-traditional approach in terms of communicating with families. We post it in our WhatsApp page. We have send our posters and flyers to our organizations like Portland Empowered and partner with them in terms of outreach to families who are multilingual and would not necessarily know how to approach enrollment in Portland Public Schools if they have new students. So, those are some of the things that we do. And we also review review families who we know are coming up and connect with them and let them know that now your child is eligible for pre-K or K, and then we make appointments with them.
And then I would just add one other strategy, which is that I had mentioned before, Priscilla, who's our McKinney-Vento Coordinator. And this is specific for families experiencing homelessness, but she's actively, in conversations with families. And so she'll come and call me and say, we have a student experiencing homelessness or qualifying for McKinney-Vento, and how can we figure out a way to find a seat for them? So that's another, part of the population that has a lot of proactive support around that.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. A tip, Boys and Girls Club would also be a good resource because I know they are on the ground and in specific communities most of the time. But thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Billia. Mr. Youssef.
Thank you so much. So when you were talking about why families decline, you mentioned they might ask different programs. What are those programs?
So different programs in the city. So they might, any of the childcare programs. So it could be a formal program, like some of the ones that we partner with, a home childcare center. Some go to Head Start. So there's a variety. And certainly I think, once again, Matt and Katie could chime in if you want to on the other programs across the city, but it's not just like a center. It's like kind of a range of options. And some of the childcare programs at homes end up with longer hours and more flexibility. So it's those sorts of, it's kind of a range, if that makes sense. I don't know, Katie or Matt, if you would add to that at all. Sounds like maybe not.
All right, thank you. You also mentioned layer of complicity when you were talking about why we don't have free for all. And you mentioned that some families accept the transportation. Does that mean you have certain number and then if
for getting
the transportation?
So I think the biggest challenge, there is, I think, and Javier, who's also our COO, can speak to some of the specifics on transportation. I think one of the big things has to do with the routes. And so, it'd be one thing if we just had pre-Ks in our schools across the board, and then we're adding students and we're just trying to make sure we have enough seats with the harnesses and the bus aids. But I think the bigger thing here is that they have to factor in paths, right? So we don't have the elementary hours at paths except for the pre-K site. And then the partner sites across the city, like Children's Odyssey and YFO, which are not on the route. So I think it's about trying to figure out that puzzle And Superintendent, I don't know if you want to elaborate any
Yeah, I
beyond
mean, I
that.
think that's it. I think the complexity of, we don't have, all of our buses run, 3 different routes every day, to an elementary, to a middle school, and to another elementary. Roughly, some of them, have special ed and transport kids to high schools and things along those lines. But they have all of that, and that's between our all of our mainstream, all of our mainland sites, right? And then to be able to run this, we're adding a number of additional locations that, are not built into our route. So we added 2 buses, and so that gave us a little bit of flexibility. That gives us an additional 6 places that we've been able to go to, but those are not dedicated just to pre-K. Those are to be able to, add pre-K students to all of our other routes, add these additional routes. And, I think that's the bulk of the complexity. And then back to the why some parents, there is no way, for example, for us to take a student from the Longfellow attendance area and transport them to Rowe or Talbot, where they may be placed, because we do not have routes that are going from that neighborhood to that school, because our routes are within the neighborhood catchment areas. So for some people, it's, if you need transportation, you can't, and Malia talked about this, that some of the people that are on the waiting list are because they absolutely need transportation, and others may have more flexibility to be placed at multiple sites because they'll take care of their own transportation.
Thank you so much. One last question about the social work challenge. That stipend from the budget, the primary budget, is it something helpful that you can see is progressing now?
Yeah, I mean, the added stipend so that we can have Karen working with the pre-K sites has been, I mean, just huge. She's been doing a lot of work for the pre-Ks. So that's been incredibly valuable. It's kind of in a consultative way, right? Because it's outside of her typical full-time social work position. And so that's why we're feeling like the need is significant enough that we need probably a better solution than just somebody's kind of additional hours outside of the workday. But adding that stipend and having that this year has been really, really meaningful. And she's been doing a lot of deep work with the partners. Is that what you're, okay.
Thank you so much. I'm good. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Youssef. Ms. Russell-Better.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much for all of that in-depth information. I'm really kind of blown away by the remarkable growth that's happened, especially in the last 2 years, how much has progressed. I was reflecting on my 6th grader being in the first pre-K class at Przemska in 2014, and just thinking about how that was all so new. And, there weren't all these pieces, the transportation, and just knowing how few people are not getting, like, how few people were able to get spots, kind of when pre-K was new, and just knowing like the access, how much that's widened. And so just really excited to hear all of that. And yeah, the complexity of the transportation sounds like a lot. So so just wanted to appreciate all of the work that's put into this, and just being persistent with it, with all of the challenges, the space challenges, the community and our building challenges. So I just had a couple questions just to understand a little bit more. Emily, I totally could picture what you were saying, talking about the challenges of in the community spaces not having nursing and like the coverage issues. So I just was curious, kind of in this school year, when you mentioned about the staffing, so have there been different issues in those sites about, closures or not being able, like how has that gone through differently than, say, in one of our buildings where there just are more resources to ensure that the pre-K classes are able to go ahead as.
If we could all knock on a piece of wood, we haven't had significant closures because of that. We did have paths had a challenge that I think we had a day where we had to close paths that was staffing related. And Kevin here at Paths has been awesome at trying to be creative and pulling in his people too. But you can imagine, I mean, that having somebody who's more early childhood focused is important, but he does do that. So we're piecing things together like that. We've done things like Monday I was on the phone because one of the partner sites was open and I was trying to find an ed tech who was remote to go over there, all early morning to fix, so that was like by the skin of our teeth. So it feels a little by the skin of our teeth at moments, but people have been creative and collaborative. I've been really appreciative of the teachers and the directors at the ways that they're trying to work together. And that's been true too. There's been a few times where we've had to pull people from the partner sites where we've had flexibility or the dedicated sub into our school pre-K when we haven't had a building-based sub or any solutions at the school level as well.
Right. And so the subbing for specifically early child education is so specialized, right? So you're not like at the...
Yeah, though I think, I think in the elementary schools, they can lean on their typical solutions with subs and their own dedicated subs. But I think in the partner sites, it's just, and this year there's been more need for sub with folks quarantining and things like that. And then just staffing is, they're tight. They're understaffed in a lot of cases. So they don't have their own flex internally.
Okay. Thank you. I think there's another piece about that. I was curious. I think just in your explaining the challenges of trying to have a program that's consistent across, right? The PPS buildings and the community programs. I was just curious if there was any feedback from families about the community partner sites. Just curious if there are pieces that families have shared that, maybe is not something that they're and also I wasn't clear about the transportation. Is that happening with the community the same way that they are for the other?
Okay. Yeah, we have, that's, we're describing yes, we are offering transportation to the community partner sites. And then in terms of feedback, and this might be my limited perspective where Sue might have more details. But there's not been a ton that's bubbled up in terms of parent concern or anything like that. I will say from my vantage point, programmatically, in some ways, we have more consistency in our pre-K than most other areas. We have a common curriculum, a common assessment. I think our pre-K educators are pretty connected to their early childhood standards. And so there's a lot of opportunity there for some consistency. And we've been able to grow it that way. So I think some of the things I was mentioning is that they don't have like the art teacher and the music teacher. So it's just a little different, but the pre-K program model is very play-based and a lot of that is baked straight into the curriculum as well.
Yeah, that is helpful that consistency of the curriculum is there. That helps me to picture that. Thank you. And just wanted to also just praise all of the work done to try to figure out the before and after. And it was just really helpful how you laid out those challenges, all those pieces. And just feel hopeful about moving forward with those as possible. So thank you for all of that really dogged work to get those pieces figured out as best as we can. So thank you.
Yeah. And shout out to Sue Chevalier again.
Yes. Thank you for Sue's work.
Thank you, Ms. Russell-Better. Ms. Dio.
Do you utilize Portland Adult Education as a recruitment tool for?
That's a great question. Grace, I know I see you there on your island with your palm tree. Can you answer that?
Yes, we actually were talking about it in terms of posting our flyers at your site at the Portland Adult Ed. And so we are going to be able to do that as well.
Thank you. I have some questions, and I guess I wanted to start off by saying, it is extraordinary to see that we have nearly doubled our pre-K slots since the 2018-2019 school year, and that we're on track to hit the 140 slots that we committed to adding when we passed the pre-K resolution. And so I just want to appreciate that, and how significant it is, particularly in the context of managing a pandemic over the last 2 years. So that is wonderful news. And I found, as being part of the board that passed that resolution, this presentation is really just packed with such good information in terms of, we've heard it along the way, but in terms of where we're at now. And one of my biggest takeaways is that there's still an urgent need, and that we still face the same barriers that we faced, despite, we're making progress and we're adding new slots, but we're still facing the same core barriers, to some extent, transportation. And I fully recognize the complexity and all of the challenges. And it seems like we're largely meeting the need, but the fact that we're not able to guarantee transportation, I think, is still going to be a barrier for families and cause some families to decline spots. But then more so the before and after care. And with that, again, I understand the context of the DHHS licensing and authority, and having passed the pre-K resolution just prior to the pandemic. But it still feels so hard that we're not able to offer families before and after care, because for so many families that's just going to be prohibitive. And so I, as part of the budget process, would very much look forward to supporting the support that's needed to really robustly tackle all of the issues that all the hurdles that are in our way, and in being able to offer before and after care. So thank you for bringing that to our attention as a continued challenge. And I'm so excited that our new pre-K director is starting tomorrow to really be able to take that on. I guess a couple of questions. First were, what I said is there's still an urgent need. The fact that 99 families applied to pre-K after this past year, after the lottery window closed, suggests to me that we're, even as we're, still adding the remaining seats to hit 140 additional seats, there's still going to be a need to add more slots, and yet we don't have spaces in our schools. So just recognizing that challenge, I think we've made a lot of progress, but we're not, even when we address before and after care and transportation, we're still going to need to add more pre-K slots, even after we, above and beyond the 140 additional slots that we committed to when we passed the resolution. Specifically with regard to the fact that we had multilingual and low-income families overrepresented on the pre-K waitlist last year, I'm wondering if we have considered holding open some of the slots so that we can prioritize those families.
Yeah, I mean, the most concrete conversation we've had is in relationship to students experiencing homelessness in Mckinney-Vento. So we're working on some ideas for that. I think that one of the things that I think is important to point out is that we do manage the demographic balance according to the resolution, and we are consistent in doing that. And so that means that, the 55% qualify for free and reduced lunch and 45% do not. And so from a demographic perspective, we're kind of managing and manipulating toward that outcome. And so in terms of reserving spots, I think that would be, I guess I'd be curious to hear more what you're thinking, or if you're talking about more over. I also the initial slide, so we have a higher percent of English language learners in pre-K as compared to our district total. We have a higher percent of, I think, Black and African American students as compared to white in our district averages. So our pre-K program has a higher percent of students of color and a higher percent of English language learners, and is intentionally demographically balanced in terms of free and reduced lunch to hit the 55-45. So I guess my question, I know we're not in a back and forth. So that would be, I definitely think we need to figure out the McKinney-Vento.
Yeah.
But we would be striving for these demographic outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of holding it, I guess that would be my thing I'd want to think more about.
Can I just add something? And it's more of a question for you, Malia.
Yeah.
I also understand that the 99 number is, it's not, it's a rolling enrollment. So also a more mobile population is more likely to be represented in that group, because of those folks that, arrived in August, and that's when, and obviously our lottery was in April. So I think that that's also a part of that.
No, I understand that. And Assistant Superintendent Nally, I appreciate your reminding me about the 55-45 percentages that we're working towards. And I guess for me, then these data just suggest that it's even more of an indication that we don't have enough seats. And yes, we're going to do everything we can to add 2 more classrooms for next year, but just recognizing that there's still such an urgent need for classrooms. And then, I'd be interested to hear from you, and maybe also from Matt, is after we're able to meet everyone, if we get to a point where, and I'm going to follow up on this in a second, but if we get to a point where we're able to guarantee transportation and we have before and after care, what do we think that will, how do we think that will affect the number of slots that really that families need?
Yeah. So I just want to say one more thing about your previous question in terms of holding slots, because what I neglected to explain is that in essence, we do that. And so that's where we've tried to describe in our lottery process, which we're trying to now make more transparent, how we go about this. So we will hold, so we tend to fill the not low income seats right away.
Okay.
And so we hold.
Okay.
And so we end up holding those and so this is where families sometimes might have a frustration. Well, I thought that there's an open seat. I heard this and that. And so we're trying to help families understand that we're actively managing toward this, which does mean that there are sometimes seats open and we're going through our wait list. And if we aren't finding the families, we'll wait because we know that we have this happening. So I guess I should have explained that, because that is actually ultimately what we're doing. And then the second, you were wondering, so I think Matt can maybe speak to this, but the work we're doing with the Data Innovation Project, you saw some helpful data tonight, but there's a slew of slides behind that we weren't quite ready to share that are driving toward that question, along with the focus groups, which is really trying to understand at what point can we feel confident that we've achieved genuine universal access? That's a question that I've had, so that we can understand, does the 5-year target get us there? And if not, what do we need and where do we need it? So that is the entire objective of the work we're doing with the Data Innovation Project. I spoke about the short-term implication, which is where should we expand next year, but it's ultimately to give us that longer-term view. And so they have work, and we're looking at it like they're giving us the overview of percent of students who are having a pre-K experience, the percent of those that are in a high quality experience, what's the overall community need. So we can come back, I think in a little while, once we have that more fleshed out, and I think we should to kind of share an update on that. Because I understand your question. It's the same question I think we all have.
Yeah, I would love to do another board focus once that data is at a point that you could share it with us.
Yeah. Okay.
My next question is, I believe, for Matt, which is around the quality 3 stage and how. I remember from when we passed the pre-K resolution that there are a lot of barriers to accreditation, and I'm wondering how, what, how can the board understand the quality 3 classification and what that means relative to accreditation and the quality 4 level. I don't know if Matt's still with us.
Yeah, he's here.
Yeah. Well, I think in a nutshell, the level 4, what's currently step 4, is accredited. So you meet the accreditation of a governing body like the National Association for the Education of Young Children. There's some others as well. And level 3, step 3 currently does not require that. So when we were initially talking with partners, 3 years ago, we had limited the pool to those accredited step 4 providers. We now know, now that we know that step 3 are eligible to be partners as well. And actually, even, for example, step 1 or 2 could, if they were able to demonstrate that they can comply with the state's pre-K guidelines. A lot of what ends up being the challenge is actually staff credentials. And so those are a lot of the gradations between quality levels, is the level of education that staff have. So in some cases that involves whether it's a degree or a certification. And so those are where some of those gradations come in. I do think that a lot of the folks who are at, for example, a step 3, in many ways, their operation is similar to a step 4, but they may not have ever pursued accreditation. And so that's where I think there's grounds to really explore some potential partners.
Thank you. That was very helpful. And then can you help remind me, but I believe when we passed the pre-K resolution that we required certification for teachers in community programs in our, for our teachers in community programs.
Yeah.
So it could be that it's a step 3 center that we're able to partner with, but that the teacher for our public pre-K program would still have the same accreditation as in our schools.
Correct. I mean, they would have to be hired as a teacher or an ed tech in our schools. So yes, that's true.
I just want to clarify that, especially for people that are listening and wanting to ensure that we're still offering the highest quality program to all students.
Yeah.
I'm wondering on the transportation challenges, just noting that in the kind of discussion of potential budget requests for next year, that transportation isn't included. And so I'm wondering why not.
First of all, we haven't done the budget yet, so that's not, but we have a hard time filling positions as it is. So I think that whether we include it or not, it's doesn't guarantee that we'll be able to fill it.
Okay. I think that's it. So just again, noting the incredible progress in adding so many slots and staying on track to what I think had been a an ambitious goal, even through the pandemic. But at the same time, noting that the same core barriers that we had, 4 years ago are the barriers that we have now. I'm really hopeful that we can, in particular, make progress on the before and after care. Fall of 2023 sounds like too far from now, but I get it. So I want to hope that the board can do everything we can to support making that happen, adding before and after care no later than the fall of 2023.
Great.
And thank you so much, Assistant Superintendent Nally, for this presentation. And I cannot even begin to understand how this was your side work. So you continue to amaze us.
I'm happy it's over, but it was great. So thank you all. And again, just an appreciation for all those people I mentioned at the beginning whose work I was really representing. So thank you.
And thank you, Malia, and also thank you, Matt, and Katie, for your support in this work as we've come as far as we have. This started with a lot of work at the starting strong level. So we're very grateful for your participation in this work and continued support.
Chair Figdor, Superintendent Budana, can I just make an announcement regarding pre-K? And so I want to take this opportunity to announce that the pre-K lottery registration application, it starts on February 14th, Valentine's Day. So that's easy to remember. Valentine's Day is when we start the pre-K application, and it's through March 4th. And we begin registration as well for kindergarten on February 28th.
And are you doing this from the tax haven and that you are
in the Caribbean?
Thank you so much for taking every opportunity to get the word out. Excellent. So now unless Mr. Superintendent, you had something to close the board focus with? Okay. So now we're moving to new business. First read of proposed FY23 capital improvement projects. So just noting that we will hold a workshop after we adjourn this meeting on the FY23 capital improvement projects, the CIP. All right, so that is it. We are ready to adjourn. So again, once we adjourn, we have one workshop tonight, and it's on our proposed CIP for next year. And other than that, we have, we have Ms. Russell-Better, do we have a policy and curriculum meeting scheduled yet?
I didn't see it on the calendar, but I think we did select a date.
There's a finance committee meeting coming up, and it is on the 10th. So on Thursday, February 10th at 6 p.m. And our next full board meeting is on Tuesday, the 15th at 6 p.m. So with that, I think it's time to adjourn. Is there a motion? Ms. Biliou, seconded by Ms. Russell-Better. All in favor, just with a show of hands. It is unanimous. We are adjourned at 8:05 p.m.